Welcome to the Intrinsic Report, where we leave you informed and inspired. In the wake of world events unfolding over the last couple of weeks, I wanted to bring to your attention what well-meaning people on the political left get wrong. So as we get started, tell me, what's the worst thing anyone has ever called you? You've probably been called naive before. Maybe gently, maybe with a sting. But that word, it's more layered than you think. Naivety is your instinct to trust, to see good where others see risk. It's not stupidity, it's belief. And yes, it's beautiful. Your heart builds deep connections because you lead with openness. People feel safe around you. Your optimism shines even when others give up. You stay curious, imaginative, morally grounded. Basically, you make the world softer just by being in it. But I need to say this because it matters. Your naivety can leave you exposed. People may lie, manipulate, take more than they give, and you might mistake charm for kindness, persistence for love. And when reality breaks your illusion, man, it hurts like hell. You know, naivety in politics is a lot like this. It often shows up as overconfidence in goodness, underestimation of complexity, and a belief in simple cause-effect logic. The obvious culprits being left-leaning political philosophies of our era. And I don't mean to just take a cheap shot here, but hear me out. Classical liberalism in its purest Enlightenment era form, as espoused by Locke and Rousseau, assumes people are rational, free, and moral enough to govern themselves. In other words, if we just protect natural rights, life, liberty, property, people will create fair, prosperous societies, it argues. But here's the thing. The underlying assumption is that people will use freedom responsibly, and that through reason, the worst parts of ourselves, like tribalism or greed, can be overcome. And I'm not sure that that's how the world works. A rosy picture though, but it underplays the role of things like power dynamics, manipulation, or even collective irrationality. Another that's come to my attention a lot lately is pacifism. Pacifism, as envisioned by Gandhi or Tolstoy, holds that nonviolence is not just a tactic, but a universal truth. In other words, all conflict can be resolved through compassion, dialogue, and moral integrity. But what this take assumes is that all humans can be trusted to follow their conscience. It's a belief that even brutal regimes can be swayed by moral appeal. I mean, if you were ever bullied back in school, pacifism would be you turning the other cheek enough times for the bully to feel bad and stop beating you up. I mean, you could do that. But in certain cases, it becomes unrealistic, especially in the face of violent oppression or even existential threats. So whether you espouse classical liberal beliefs or pacifism, your liberal ideals for freedom, openness, peace, reason can make you naive to how they can be exploited by illiberal forces. Without safeguards, these philosophies risk enabling their own undoing by tolerating those who seek to dismantle them. I like to prepare some quotes for you just to crystallize basically everything I'm gonna be saying in this video. And the first quote I want to bring to your attention is one by Michel Houellebecq. I hope I'm saying his name correct. He's a French author of novels, poems, and essays. And this is what Michel says. Liberal societies, in their pursuit of openness, often become defenseless against those who exploit their freedoms for illiberal ends. Another quote is by Roger Scruton. I believe he is an English philosopher, writer, and social critic. So in his book, How to Be a Conservative, he says, "The fatal irony of liberalism is that it erodes the very traditions and structures that made its freedoms possible." The final quote is by James Burnham. The late Burnham was an American philosopher and political theorist, and this is what he said: "Liberalism is the ideology of Western suicide." Together, the observations highlight how liberal societies become defenseless when liberal values are manipulated by illiberal actors. So, in dismantling traditional structures, liberals unintentionally undermine the foundations that protect their freedoms. And in so doing, liberalism enables the collapse of liberal societies. We have examples of these warnings throughout history. So let's start with the classical era. We're in Athens, Greece. So Athens, the birthplace of democracy, was radically liberal, allowing open debate, freedom of speech, and widespread citizen participation. But this openness also proved its undoing. Demagogues like Cleon rose to power by manipulating public sentiment, using freedom of speech to rally mobs and push for aggressive, destructive policies like the Cilician expedition, which ended in disaster. The trial and execution of Socrates, condemned for impropriety towards the state gods, otherwise breaking blasphemy laws, sort of, and corrupting the youth with misinformation, also shows how easily an open society can turn illiberal under internal pressure. I mean, who'd have thought the same democratic system that valued open debate would become so intolerant of dissent that it killed its greatest philosopher? Let's head on over to Rome. The Roman Republic was open to plebeian influence via tribunes, and the rights of citizens were fiercely guarded. The plebeians would be sort of like the working class today, and them having representation, maybe in parliament or Congress, depending on where you're from. But this openness also left it vulnerable to class exploitation and factionalism. The populist Gracchi brothers used their offices to push for land reforms and mass redistribution, appealing directly to the masses in ways that circumvented traditional senatorial power. In response, their political opponents resorted to mob violence and assassinations, setting off a spiral where liberal norms were replaced by escalating power grabs, civil wars, and eventually imperial autocracy. What about the medieval era? The Catholic Church easily comes to mind here. The Catholic Church in medieval Europe had served as a transnational space for spiritual inquiry, intellectual openness, and public debate. The scholastic movement encouraged reasoned argument within the Catholic Church. But over time, this intellectual freedom was exploited by church authorities to expand political power and suppress dissent. The church's open forums became increasingly controlled by illiberal mechanisms like the Inquisition and excommunication. Groups like the Cathars and political critics like Dante were silenced, not debated. Medieval England offers another case study. The signing of the Magna Carta in 1215 is often celebrated as a medieval step toward constitutional liberalism. It established that even kings were subject to law and recognized baronial rights. However, medieval English monarchs like King John continuously circumvented the charter's restrictions by using legal loopholes, bribes, and papal backing. Much closer home to the 20th century, we have interwar Europe. So in the years following World War I, several European democracies such as Italy, Spain, and Hungary collapsed not because they were overthrown by force, but because authoritarian leaders exploited electoral systems and political freedoms to consolidate power. For example, Mussolini in Italy used constitutional processes to become prime minister before turning Italy into a dictatorship. Francisco Franco capitalized on political openness during the Spanish Civil War, only to impose a brutal decades-long authoritarian regime. Now, to the most famous Weimar Germany. The Weimar Republic was one of the most liberal democracies of its time, with robust freedom of speech, multi-party elections, and an open press. Yet, these very freedoms were exploited by the Nazi Party. Adolf Hitler used public rallies, free press, and democratic elections to legally rise to power. And once in office, he quickly dismantled the democratic system using emergency powers granted by the Reichstag, exploiting the constitution to destroy the republic. Across the pond in the US, during the Civil Rights Movement, while the US Civil Rights Movement stands as a triumph of liberal democracy, the broader openness of the American system also allowed far-left and far-right groups to exploit freedoms of speech and assembly. During the 1960s and 70s, radical groups like the Weather Underground used civil liberties to organize violent attacks, while extremist white supremacist groups like the KKK openly exploited the same freedoms to incite racial violence. So just doing a quick jog down memory lane reveals how political openness, while noble, can become self-destructive when illiberal actors exploit it. Yes, illiberal actors use liberal systems, laws, and freedoms to rise and divide, and ultimately dismantle the very institutions that enabled their ascent. And you would have to be incredibly naive to underestimate the threat this presents. This story begins in Ismaila, Egypt. The year is 1928. A man by the name Hassan Al-Banna founds the Muslim Brotherhood in response to British colonial rule. He blames the British for the cultural dilution of Islam by Western modernity. Al-Banna admires fascist methods and organizes the Brotherhood into a hierarchical movement aiming at global Islamic rule. On the surface, his organization promises social renewal, educational reform, and religious revival. At its core, the Brotherhood's ultimate mission is the gradual establishment of Islamic governance globally, one state at a time. Initially, British officials underestimate the Brotherhood. Some even see it as a useful counterweight to the more dangerous threats like communism and secular nationalists in Egypt. It's not the 1940s and World War II rages. British authorities in Egypt adopt a contradictory approach, suppressing the Brotherhood in some cases while quietly engaging them in others when it suits wartime interests. The Brotherhood's power base grows, capitalizing on Western indecisiveness, gradually embedding themselves deeper into Egyptian society. They grow rapidly across Egypt, gaining tens of thousands of followers, and they engage in education, charity, and paramilitary activities. The Brotherhood's pan-Islamist vision emboldens the anti-Zionist movement in Palestine, clashing with British imperial interests. After participating in the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, something changes. The Brotherhood adopts militant elements to its cause. They showed their hand in the assassination of then Prime Minister Mahmoud an-Nukrashi by a Brotherhood member disguised as a police officer that same year. And just like that, the Brotherhood became the enemy of the state. Crackdowns and executions follow. On February 12, 1949, Hassan Al-Banna is shot multiple times in Cairo by an unidentified gunman, widely believed to be linked to Egyptian security forces. He leaves behind a rich legacy, which the Brotherhood would turn into myth, of one who accomplished the creation of the Arab world's first mass Islamist political organization and died a martyr violently at the hands of a state that feared his influence. Around the time Al-Banna was murdered, an Egyptian intellectual travels to the US for further studies. He had made a name for himself as a literary critic back home. During his 2-year stay in Colorado, he's disillusioned by American culture, especially its materialism, consumerism, sexual freedom, and religious pluralism. After 2 years, he returns home appalled by the West's state of pagan ignorance. Thus, he devotes himself to ensuring Egypt remains a true Islamic state unadulterated by Western secularism. Meet Sayyid Qutyb, the man who hated Colorado so much he was determined to bring the West down. He joins the Brotherhood in 1953 at a time when they were leaderless and fragmented. Qutyb fuses Islamic revivalism with totalitarian thought, creating a blueprint for Islamist jihad that mirrors fascism. His ideas introduce a rejection of individualism in favor of collective purity, apocalyptic worldview, and a romanticization of death to the movement. Qutyb embraced conspiratorial anti-Semitism echoing European Nazi propaganda. In his tract, Our Struggle with the Jews, Qutyb recasts Jewish people as the eternal corruptors of morality and religion. In short, Coloridians, Jews, mortal enemies. His ideas would inspire the ideological underpinnings of jihadist groups like Al-Qaeda and Hamas in the years to come. By the 1950s, the Brotherhood is a key player in Egypt's nationalist uprising against British control. Nasser and the Free Officers draw plans for a coup to oust King Farouk. The Free Officers need legitimacy and mass support in the streets. The Brotherhood's leadership supported the move and mobilized members to maintain public order and rally for the new regime's legitimacy. The king is ousted on July 23, 1952. But the marriage of convenience breaks by the following year, as the Brotherhood's ambitions soon conflict with Nasser's policies. While Nasser favored a nationalist, secular socialist-leaning state, the Brotherhood wanted Egypt governed by Sharia and an Islamic moral order. In short, that whole talk of women's rights reforms, Nasser, that's just crossing the line. The political tensions escalate in 1954 after an alleged assassination attempt on Nasser by a Brotherhood member. Thousands of the Brotherhood are jailed or executed. Qutb's execution in 1966 by Nasser's regime turned him into a martyr. So somehow he gets to go to a place where there aren't more Coloridians, Jews, or half-dressed women. Western diplomats observe the suppression with muted approval. But the Brotherhood's ideology isn't dead just yet. It's only begun spreading, catalyzed by the narratives of repression, political persecution, and the enduring myths of Al-Hassan and Qutyb. The Gulf monarchies welcomed Brotherhood teachers, scholars, and exiles as allies against Nasser's secular Arab nationalism. Brotherhood members take roles in universities and influence Islamic curricula. Leaders like Muhammad Qutyb, Sayyid Qutyb's brother, begin teaching at the King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, influencing a generation of Islamist thinkers. By 1961 through 62, Saudi Arabia establishes the Muslim World League to promote Islam abroad, staffed partly by Brotherhood exiles. Meanwhile, in post-World War II Europe, Western intelligence agencies, including the CIA, begin recruiting Muslim exiles and Brotherhood figures as Cold War assets against the Soviet Union. Munich, West Germany, becomes the first major Brotherhood hub in Europe after exiles settled there. The Saudis' Muslim World League fund the completion of the Munich Mosque, and although originally intended as a symbol of peaceful Islamic outreach, it becomes a strategic base for Brotherhood influence in Europe. By the 1970s and 80s, the Brotherhood have transformed the Munich Mosque into an operational hub. Key figures during this time is Sayyid Rammadan. Being Hassan Al-Banna's son-in-law, Rammadan has the social clout to work covertly for the CIA from the Munich Mosque. At the time, the US and West German authorities viewed Muslim anti-Soviet exiles as potential allies against the USSR's Muslim population. From Germany, they expand their reach across Europe, building networks in the UK and France. In the 1970s, London emerges as a safe haven for exiled Islamist leaders due to the UK's relatively open political environment. Brotherhood members and sympathizers establish Islamic student organizations across UK universities. Paris and other French cities see the Brotherhood influence migrant associations tied to Francophone Africa. In the late 1970s through the 80s, Brotherhood-linked students and professionals migrate to the US and Canada. Chicago and Toronto become key organizing cities for Brotherhood-affiliated groups in North America. The earliest of these Brotherhood stealth groups in the US is the Muslim Student Association, MSA. It's been running since 1963 at the University of Illinois. They focus on recruiting young Muslims on campus, hosting speakers who have defended jihadist violence, and framing Islamist political aims in the language of religious rights and anti-discrimination. Now, in 1981, the Muslim Student Association evolves into the Islamic Society of North America to support the growing Muslim community in North America. ISNA serves as an umbrella group for various Muslim organizations in the US, promoting Islamist ideology under the guise of mainstream Muslim representation. After Hamas is formed in Gaza in 1987, its North American Brotherhood branch is formed in California in 1989 under the Holy Land Fund. HLF is tasked with financially supporting Hamas. 1993 sees the funding of Muslim American Society, MAS. They are publicly acknowledged by some founders as a Brotherhood-inspired group. They function as a grassroots mobilization arm, organizing protests, educational programs, and outreach that advances an Islamist agenda. 1994 sees the Islamic Association for Palestine rebrand to the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR. Now, CAIR positions itself as a civil rights organization to shield Islamist-linked individuals and groups from scrutiny. They begin pressuring media, politicians, and law enforcement to avoid using terms like Islamic terrorism. They influence law enforcement training materials to minimize Muslim profiling, and as well engage in outreach programs. Now, what needs to be said here is that many of these organizations share personnel, funding streams, and strategic goals, especially the legitimization of Islamist political objectives in mainstream discourse, political lobbying, and especially the intimidation of critics via accusations of Islamophobia. By the close of the 20th century, Western intelligence and policymakers, too focused on Soviet containment, have overlooked the Brotherhood's stealth infiltration into Western institutions of academia and politics. "2001 sounds the first wake-up call. Al-Qaeda, rooted in Muslim Brotherhood influence ideology, execute the 9/11 attacks. Many terrorists are Qutb's ideological descendants. And as they say, the student isn't above the master. So if the master has a problem with Coloradians and Jews, you can be sure the entire class is going to make mortal enemies out of Coloradians and Jews, to put it lightly. Military action becomes a necessary response to dismantle Al-Qaeda's base and the Taliban regime that sheltered it. It's considered as a legitimate defense against a totalitarian movement committed to attacking liberal societies at the time. Domestically, Western leaders across both the Bush and Obama administrations court Brotherhood-affiliated organizations, mistakenly believing them to represent moderate Islam. So, projecting their pluralist, materialist worldview onto the Brotherhood, liberal governments are blinded to ideologies that value purity over compromise and death over life. In 2008, Americans are again forced to awaken to how the Brotherhood's tactics have evolved right under their noses. During the Holy Land 5 trial, a key internal document surfaces in their 1991 explanatory memorandum, explicitly describing their mission in North America as civilization jihad. They wouldn't storm the gates. Rather, they would sabotage Western society from within. And as we've already covered, they formed organizations like the HLF, CAIR, ISNA, MSA, and many others that I've left out owing to time constraints. The court case exposes the role of HLF was specifically to provide the funding pipeline, especially for Palestinian causes aligned with Hamas. At the time, HFL has funded Hamas to the tune of $12.4 million, making clear the Brotherhood's modus operandi. Strategically exploit the freedom of religion, anti-discrimination laws, and political access to build influence over Muslim communities, interfaith dialogue, and even US military chaplaincy programs. The Brotherhood manifestos uncovered during the Holy Land 5 trial mirror fascist manifestos that sought long-term ideological war through institutions. So you can see how it all comes full circle since the early days of Al-Banna and Qutyb. We return to the birthplace of the Muslim Brotherhood. Egypt is at a political crossroads. Hosni Mubarak is overthrown in the 2011 Arab Spring uprising. The Brotherhood's political wing, the Freedom and Justice Party, wins Egypt's first democratic elections in decades. Mohamed Morsi becomes president, and Western leaders celebrate the Brotherhood's rise without realizing the implications. Even though they had negotiated with secular or even anti-Islamist actors in order to appeal to a broader electorate, signs of ideological dilution lead to internal friction between political leaders and the religious core. Morsi makes his choice. He moves to consolidate Brotherhood influence in government, media, and constitutional committees. Then, he issues a constitutional decree granting himself sweeping powers beyond judicial review, ostensibly to protect the revolution. But this only looked like authoritarianism in religious garb. The new constitution, pushed through by a largely Islamist assembly, is seen as undermining secular rights and minority protections. Secularists, liberals, Coptic Christians, women's rights groups, and even some Islamists feel sidelined, as Morsi's rhetoric often favored Brotherhood supporters over national unity. On June 30th, 2013, huge nationwide protests erupt, demanding Morsi's resignation. The turnout is in the millions, making it one of the largest demonstrations in history. After being in power a brief 2 years, Morsi is forced out in a coup. He's detained and later faces trials on charges ranging from inciting violence to espionage. The Brotherhood is banned from its ideological birthplace once again. A clash of visions within the Brotherhood emerges in the aftermath of the coup, crackdowns, and ban. The old guards still advocate patience, gradualism, and strict nonviolence. The younger members, frustrated, push for more assertive tactics, including mass protests, civil disobedience, and in some cases, direct retaliation against the state. In the Middle East, the more youthful Brotherhood groups like Hamas pursue a path of jihad. Elements of this militant engagement are seen in Iran, northern Syria, Lebanon, and Somalia. So, in 2013, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Bahrain joined Egypt in designating the Brotherhood as a terrorist organization and cracked down heavily on its networks. Better late than never, right? Widely discredited back home, the Brotherhood applies a different approach in the West. It presents as peaceful civil rights advocates while still pursuing long-term goals fundamentally at odds with liberal democratic values. As the costliness of military intervention and war fatigue forces a shift in Middle East foreign policy, realists drop democratic transformation goals for stability. Isolationists demand a total withdrawal from foreign entanglement. And since Islamist groups frame themselves as resistant movements against Western imperialism, many on the political left embrace this framing, seeing Islamists as allies against US power. And even though Islamic religious views on gender, sexuality, or governance might sharply differ from progressive norms, the enemy of my enemy dynamic leads to cooperation between Brotherhood groups and the left, despite ideological mismatches. Many on the academic left and activist left interpret conflicts involving Muslim-majority countries through the lens of colonialism, imperialism, and Western interventionism. This has fostered a sense of solidarity with Islamic political actors, viewing them as resisting Western domination, even if their own politics are authoritarian or theocratic. I guess this is the part where Qutyb would say, "Such ignorant pagans," while rubbing his hands, I believe. So by using front organizations to present a moderate phase to gain access to political decision makers and influence policy subversion, the Brotherhood continues its long-term aim of the implementation of Sharia law in the US, across the West, then worldwide. And when concerns are raised, the response is slow, clouded by fears of appearing Islamophobic or illiberal. Like the hospitable homeowner who removes fences to avoid offending the neighbors, the liberal West welcomed the Brotherhood with good intentions. But as history shows, some of these guests were not just visitors. They rearranged the house, set their own rules, and invited others to do the same. Many Western intellectuals explain Islamism either in terms of colonialism and its injustices, or poverty and underdevelopment. And while these are real factors, they don't explain the ideological fervor and cult of death at the heart of their various movements. And the refusal to engage with Islamism as a totalitarian ideology isn't just naive. It repeats the 1930s liberal failure to confront fascism early. Well, that's all I had for you in this episode. Let me know what you thought, or if you'd like a series on this topic. I tried to keep it as lean as possible so that I don't bog you down with the details, but if you're interested in these kind of topics, just let me know down in the comments, and I'll see if I can continue to work on a few more videos for you. Subscribe and follow for more. I've been your host, Martin K, for the Intrinsic Report, where we leave you informed and inspired. Catch you in the next. Cheers.